Eugene Sledge was a Marine. He was a Marine in World War II, and he ended up being a university professor and an author when he got done. He wrote this book. I read this book for the first time when I was on deployment to Iraq, my first deployment to Iraq. And it definitely kept me in check, because it made me always remember that what we were experiencing, this war that we were in, was something that men had always experienced, and actually they have experienced much, much worse than I ever experienced. And this book was later used to make the documentary, a PBS documentary called The War. And in 2000, I think it came out in 2010, was the HBO miniseries called The Pacific, which is just an absolutely epic series. And if you haven't watched The Pacific, it's phenomenal. Get it and watch it. It's completely realistic. One of the things that struck me when I watched it for the first time was, he talks about the waiting, and the very first episode of The Pacific, you're waiting for something to happen. They're showing the guys prep, and then they actually land, and you're waiting and waiting for something to happen, and it doesn't, and it has this feeling, and I remember that feeling, especially being in Ramadi, when you'd be out in the streets and no shooting had started yet, and I would be, everyone would have this feeling. You're waiting for it to start, and every step you're waiting for it to start. So it does it does an incredible job of portraying that and giving you that feeling. Now, what's important to remember about Eugene Sledge, and that's another great thing about the Pacific, is that they do interviews with these guys. They do interviews with them, and you can see, when you watch this, you will see that Eugene Sledge, and as I thought about how I would describe Eugene Sledge, he's a Marine, and you get whatever ideas you get in your mind of what a Marine is, a tough guy, a guy filled with bravado. Eugene Sledge just will destroy that image, because Eugene Sledge, and if I think of the way I would describe him, it would be to say simply, he's a good man. And you can tell when he talks that he's an upright man, and that he's a moral man, and he's a gentle and a kind person. I mean, his gentleness and his kindness oozes out of him. And he seems like, and I don't use this word very often, but I will use it because this is how I would describe him. He seems like a lovely human being. I mean, he just seems like a lovely person. And so as we go into this book, remember that this guy who went through this was just an absolutely incredibly good human, and also an incredible warrior. Now, the last podcast we talked about Patton and war as I knew it, and that is a general's view. And if you remember when we talked about when we went to Sri Lanka, that was that guy described the foot soldier's view as being a worm's view, because you're so in the front line that it's like a worm. And that's what this is. This is a soldier's book. This is a trooper's book. This is the absolute front lines. And it is a book that really unveils a lot about will and survival and the psychological nature of war and what it does to people and what people are capable of doing. And also, I think it makes it very clear why we fight against evil. And I think that it's something that makes me think always about where we are in the world in a war against evil.